Thanks so much. Welcome, everyone. This is another organizational assembly plenary, and we're so delighted as a community to bring to you some of the thoughts and work that our members within the organizational assembly are having. For this one, we are highlighting the societies and associations that are very keenly interested in the work of RDA. And we'd like to share with you some of the things that are happening across those communities and engage in a conversation where we can continue to develop how to help our researchers, how to help across all of the disciplines and domains move towards better data, software management, and all of the other digital products, and how societies and associations can help in this way. So I'm going to kick off with some work that's happening in my own organization. So my name is Shelley Stahl. I am the Senior Director for Data Leadership at the American Geophysical Union. And we have had a number of projects and programs to help our researchers and our community develop better expertise. But this morning, I'm going to talk to you about a seminar series that we've been running, and Angie Hunter has been part of that. I'll introduce Angie in just a moment. Greg Tannenbaum has also spoken on it. We've been gathering together societies and associations to explore different ways of helping our own researchers do better with data sharing and citation. And just to give you, I'll just go through these quickly because none of this is going to be new information for all of you, but you can see how we're framing it for societies, which is a little bit different. It's a more broad thinking. So within the US, I've been a little shy to talk about FAIR. It's an acronym not as well known, but all of the elements are being discussed. And we talk about research data that's well documented, discoverable, and accessible, and integrates well with data. And this actually comes from the National Academy's Roundtable on Incentives. So Greg will talk a little bit about that, helping transparency, and you can read the rest of these. And we highlight some of the work that's come out of the National Academies in 2018, the Open Science by Design, which has been really helpful to galvanize broad stakeholders around what it means to have open science, which of course includes open data and open software. And then coming behind that was the reproducibility and replicability in science, another really valuable document to help the conversation move forward. And the reason I like this one very much is it actually has a section in the back that is directed, the National Science Foundation funded this particular report, and it actually gives them a blow-by-blow on exactly what they need to do. And I have actually referenced that appendix multiple times in conversations related to the National Science Foundation. So for me, it's been incredibly valuable to point to a vetted resource for this is how we move forward. Now let's take some steps. And then we all know the turning FAIR into reality. Some of you on this call have actually helped write this and make this happen. And then, coming around the world to Australia with the work that's happening at ARDC. And I know I'm leaving out so many other countries that have moved forward with what it means to have a better management around data and software. So this image is just brilliant. How we can work together internationally, how RDA plays a really important role in that. And for societies, one of the things I think is really relevant to the conversation on culture change is how we can focus the discussion around the researcher, how we can take what's happening around the world and bring it to the researcher in a way that's really meaningful. And I have a couple bullet points here, capability and capacity, best practices, and cross-domain discussion. I think the societies and associations are critical in moving this forward. And we envelop all of these elements within our domains. And what does it mean to have that culture change? What can we actually do? Yep, I think that's good enough. So my notes for this talk, that when I gave it, were actually quite lengthy on what I thought we could do. And I, you can't give someone 50 points and think they're going to hit them all, but these are the 4 I thought were the most important within societies and associations. And that's, awareness, education, leading by example, changing our own behaviors to reflect the value we see in the data that supports our research, the software that supports our research, and then creating those. And forgive me, I know Dan's on here, forgive me, this should be data and software. I really should have fixed that because we are now embracing software far more, thanks to a lot of work that's been happening within Force 11 and RISA and RDA. So that really should talk more about data and software communities. But I think these are things that we can just do. And then this from the February talk, I leading folks towards how to be more informed and highlighting. I'll give you a link to where you can find all the resources from this particular seminar series, and then highlighting our own work within AGU in the position statement. I think I'll stop there. I think that's pretty good for today. So we have within our speakers this morning representatives that come from other societies. So Angie Hunter, as well as Greg Tannenbaum, who is the Open Research Funders Group director. So he represents our funders, which really excites me because I love the direction that they're taking. And also Joris van Brassem, who represents our publisher community around open research and open data, and led the Open Data Year. And I'll let him talk to that. And just really delighted to have everybody here to speak on how to move the culture forward. So Angie is the development editor of the American Chemical Society. So she has been critical in also publishing, but also moving hearts and minds within that community. And I'm really delighted that she could join us this morning. So go ahead, Angie, you're up.
That's great. Let me share my screen and get it in presentation mode. And just want to thank you for that kind introduction. Just give a little background on myself. I've been at the ACS for 3 years, but prior to that, I worked directly for Organic Letters, which is one of the journals. I oversee 2 teams of data analysts who review this content and the supporting information in the manuscript to make sure that all the details are there, to make sure it's reproducible, always with the reader in mind, right? To know that those details are there. So we make sure that it meets the journal standards. And I also work in the publishing integrity office looking at ethics for cases that come into the journal. But today I'm going to be talking about what we've done to try to implement FAIR in the journals, and a pilot that we've been running for the past 2 years, as well as some new initiatives on data standards and a data policy. So I'm going to talk first about this FAIR pilot. So this came out of a meeting at NSF FAIR Chemical Data Publishing Guidelines, which was great. It brought together researchers, publishers, funders, librarians to talk about what it would mean to make data more prominent and reproducible within the journals. And so out of this came this FAIR data pilot, where we would ask for the primary data that supports that submission to actually be published open and available for readers. This data was proposed. It made sense to be at the Journal of Organic Chemistry and Organic Letters, since 1, I was at this workshop. 2, we have data teams that could review this data, validate it, and make sure that it was publishable. So there were a number of things that had to happen in order to make this pilot go, which is the ask. You have to ask 2 EICs to see if they will allow this and if they approve of this. And again, it's not just at one journal, to make sure that both journals wanted to do it. Write and publish an editorial to inform authors of the changes and why we wanted to do this. I think it's the most critical piece, and I think this theme will come up a number of times. Education of authors is probably the most critical thing, and to get their buy-in and support. And one of the other items was develop a data packaging tool so that we could get that metadata tagged with the data, so it would be more findable. So that was in March of 2019. By August, ACS formed a project team for this pilot and started kicking it off. And I'll talk a little more on that in the next slide. But in the meantime, we have data standards at those two journals that were misaligned. And so looking back and constantly reviewing your data standards to make it easier on the data analyst team. If they're going to be taking on extra work, reviewing raw data, we want to make sure that the data standards match. So we had to have a data summit amongst the EICs to make sure there was consistency. ACS encourages data to be submitted with all manuscripts. Any author can submit any data and publish it, and it goes to Figshare, which is freely available. So all supporting information can be accessed. However, we just know authors typically do the minimum amount just because there's so many jobs to be done when they're trying to submit. So when I did the ask of the editors in chiefs, we're very excited for this and big proponents of this. And I'm very fortunate that we have those two EICs that really care about data in the manuscript. The one thing we did was make sure that it wasn't mandatory. Again, we want to change that culture. And again, we don't want to lose authors that might not be able to do it, or if they had a submission, but they didn't have that data readily available and easy to upload. So we didn't make it mandatory. But again, going to Shelley's point, this lead by example approach, I think is, if you have leaders in your community that want to share data, I think it is really important. And so we published the editorial in February of 2020. And again, encouraging authors and AEs to submit their original data. And we put a note in the article that fair data is available. And I'll show you where that is later on. I think as we look forward to increasing this pilot, I think it would be even better if we could have some sort of badging on the article. We're not there yet. And so this is what the editorial looked like. We had a number of views for editorial. That's quite a bit to not only have a number of views, but cited as well. And once we published this editorial, we came up with a new file type so that production could find these types of files if we ever did badge them. So we have so there's SI for publication, but for this raw data specifically, we have FID for publication. The next thing we did, and I think is the most shocking, is putting this custom question in at submission, just this gentle nudge in front of authors. Do you want to submit data? Yes or no? And as part of this pilot. So we added this custom question, and I'll be able to share data in the next slide or two about what that impact was. So what do we do with this data? If authors submit data, do we just throw it over the fence and hope that it's fine? No, we actually have the data analyst team review the data that is submitted. We make sure those files are open and uploaded properly in the submission site. We assist authors when the files don't include all the data or if it's missing data. We make sure that it's aligned with what's in the supporting information. So if there's the original data, does it match the image and the supporting information? And we ask authors to fix these during revision. We make sure that that SI statement is included in the manuscript. So we don't want to put any of this burden onto production. They have their own remit. And then again, this is a pilot, it's very manual. They send me notifications. So I'm keeping track of all the data about this pilot. So again, it's not sustainable if you were to launch to 76 journals at the ACS, but we're learning a lot about author behavior. On top of this project, there was also a data packager tool, which would assist authors with packaging the data. Unfortunately, this was not well received. And I think there were two issues. One, I think there were too many steps for the author to use to package that data. It wasn't user-friendly, so we learned that. But we also gave authors two paths to submission. They could just submit the data, or they could submit it with the metadata. And so I think authors chose the easier path. Again, learning lessons about author behavior. So here's the data from our little pilot. So we launched in February 2020. That's when the editorial was published. In April of 2020, we added this file type. But when you see August of 2020, that's when we added the submission question. And now once we add that submission question, we get consistent amount of data every month. And again, this isn't much, but it's better than what we were doing before. So, and authors are continuously submitting that data. So it's exciting to see that with very little effort, we're having authors submit data. And this is what it looks like in the article. So you can see if you go to supporting information, it says at the bottom bullet point, their data is included and it's a zip file of data. So we try to make sure that that information is consistent. And then in the associated content, we always make sure that that information is there within the article. So we're trying to make sure that authors are getting some sort of badging. Again, I think in an ideal world, I would put a big gold check that data is available on the publication. We're not there yet, but again, that's a platform enhancement, but I think that would really entice authors. So what have we learned from this? That this is just a pilot and there's room for improvement. This is not sustainable to launch out to all of ACS, but there is interest in the community and we are changing authors' behavior. And education of the authors takes a lot of time, sometimes years. So the importance of sharing data, how to gather this data. We also learned that it might be easier than we anticipated for authors to upload and share their original data. What I'm finding is authors are sometimes submitting their data once they know they're on trajectory for publication. So they might not submit it originally, but they'll submit it during the revision process. And we still accept it. We still make sure that it's okay. So it's interesting to see when they are submitting it. Sometimes they're also submitting the metadata, whether it's included in that zip file data or included in their SI. So again, learning a lot. And I think just all journals should review and revitalize their data standards annually, really take a hard look at it, what is going on in the community and making sure we're incorporating that in our guidelines. And I would recommend just this custom question for authors at submission. It was just a gentle nudge for authors and it has been really beneficial. Moving to the next part of this little talk is the data initiatives that it's gone on in 2021. And so we realized that ACS really had no overarching data policies or data standards. Everything is within the journal guidelines. So if you want to find out something specific, you had to dig through that specific journal. So we want something more forward-facing, easier for the authors to use and find data standards. So we developed in partnership with ACS editors and outside experts at ACS Research Data Policy. It provides best practices recommendations for data citation, data availability statement, repositories. We're not mandating anything, but really trying to get to that level 1 of top guidelines. Again, having a baseline and put that policy in place so that if we do go to a level 2, those policies are in place. We're also trying to have a seat at the table and in these discussions have more prominent. So we became a member of RDA, again, trying to endorse top guidelines, Force 11, STM. So again, taking those steps to make sure that we're doing right by our authors. So that was launched in September of 21. In addition, there's the data guidelines. We're trying to make things consistent for authors. So if you submit to one journal, the data guidelines are all the same for that type of data. So in October of 21, data guidelines were published for biological, comp, machine learning, and simulations, and the organic community. That is also in the Publishing Center. And now we're working for nanoscience, material science, and energy. And I can say that the feedback from the editor community is welcoming of this, that they realize that there's differences in their communities and they're trying to come up with best practices and recommendations so it's consistent. And then we always just, again, try to educate authors with data management in courses such as ACS Lab, Author Lab, or ACS on Campus. So just showing you really quickly, if you go to the ACS Publishing Center, you can find the ACS Research Data Policy. This is just a quick screenshot on the left. And on the right, you can see the research data guidelines. And again, we believe this is evolving. So just because we put it up there does not mean that we're going to leave it alone. We plan to constantly get that feedback and change it when we need to. ACS Author Lab was launched, I think, a year or year and a half ago. And so it's an online training course to teach authors how to prepare and submit their manuscripts. This was done with ACS staff. And luckily I was on this project. So I sprinkled it in much data management, why you should submit your data, and anywhere I could within these courses. I think course 7, adhering to ethical guidelines, is free. Otherwise, I think you have to be an ACS member to access, but it's a really good teaching mechanism for authors. And then finally, there's ACS on Campus. There's a segment on data management. Although this was done about a year ago, we need to update it with the data policy, data standards. This is just one quick screenshot of efforts that we're trying to do to talk about data. And with that, I'll end my talk and translate it over. And if there are any questions, put them in the chat, and excited for the panel discussion.
Angie, that was tremendous. Thank you so much. It's so exciting to see everything that's happening and the, you know, the very steady moving forward, and it's similar to where we are. If we have to have the editors with us because they are truly the gatekeepers. And if they're not with you, that's not going to work. So really valuable conversations that you're having. So now we're gonna move over to funder thinking and National Academy thinking, I think. So Greg Tannenbaum, who is the director for the Open Research Funders Group, go ahead and take it away, Greg.
Fantastic. Thank you, Shelley, and thanks to the RDA for letting me share a few thoughts. Again, I'm Greg Tannenbaum. I run the Open Research Funders Group, which is a network of 24 and counting leading philanthropic organizations that, as our name would suggest, are committed to the open sharing of research outputs. Really with the fundamental belief that openness is better for philanthropy and better for science and ultimately better for society. Our members actually run the gamut in terms of their subject matter focus. So we have members who focus in the life sciences, physical sciences, social sciences, humanities, interdisciplinary. And collectively, they have grant making in the $10 billion range and assets in the $250 billion range. So we're really trying to exert some of our buying power to influence or to nudge the research ecosystem to be more open. And as part of that work, I am helping to coordinate, as Shelley mentioned, the National Academy's Roundtable on aligning incentives for open science. And it's really in that capacity that I'm speaking with you today. The Roundtable brings together senior leaders from universities and funding agencies and the government and foundations and industry to discuss incentives for adopting open science practices and current barriers and really ways to work with and across communities and disciplines to develop hiring and review and tenure and promotion and funding practices that are more reflective of open. And the reason these organizations are engaged is the members are trying to tackle big societal challenges. So we're pursuing the mysteries of science and nature and attempting to gain a better understanding of the human condition and our place in the universe. And when we think in those expansive terms, the fundamental principles that really undergird open science are key accelerators of those missions. So you think about the rapid sharing of not just results, but the underlying data, the underlying code. You think about the democratization of information, increasing collaboration, improving research transparency and replicability. Those are enablers of those big picture missions. And as part of the roundtable, we have been working to develop resources that are meant to be actionable. They're meant to be tools that can be used by various research stakeholders to really get moving in this work. And I'm sure we'll put a link in the chat to this Open Science Toolkit that we released just a few weeks ago. You can also email me and I can send you the link directly. But really, the toolkit is designed to lay out the whys and the hows of open science. So it's a modular set of resources that includes best practices and success stories and sample language and rubrics that can be adapted and adopted by a wide range of stakeholders, including societies. And of particular relevance for today's discussion, I just wanted to call out a few specific elements of this toolkit. One is a crowdsourced open science success stories database, which is available at projectopen.io. And that is really over the course of the genesis for it is over the course of hundreds of community consultations. We heard a lot about concerns and some of the struggles that come along with making open the default. You know, things like, well, it's expensive, or it's difficult to evaluate, or it infringes on academic freedom. But also we heard literally hundreds and hundreds of stories about the benefits of open science, not hypothetical, but real practical benefits that are out there in the wild. And so we decided, let's capture those. So if folks want to dig in and find examples and exemplars that are relevant to their experience, they can do so in one single place. And I'll also note specifically for this group, there are dozens of case studies and stories and articles that focus specifically on open data and open source. So I'd encourage you to explore. You can actually even add your own resources if there are things that you know about that are not captured. So if you go to projectopen.io, there's a submit, and you can submit your own stories. Another toolkit resource that I want to mention is a set of good practice primers, not best practices, because I don't know that we have those yet in a lot of places, but good practices. And they're meant to be concise guides that are that can provide sort of easy points of entry for organizations that are considering policies that address specific types of research outputs. So for example, there is an open data primer, as you would imagine, that is meant to provide really quick and clear and concise guidance on data's relevance to the open ecosystem, core considerations when developing an open data policy, approaches that different organizations are taking that reflect good practice with respect to data, real world examples of what those policies look like in action, resourcing considerations, and where to go to learn more. So these are 2 or 3 pages each, but enough to get you started and have the conversation stimulated internally. And I want to know 2 things about the toolkit and about the primers. One is that the resources are meant to be helpful for really any type of organization that's looking at how to make data and code more open, whether you're a lab or whether a university department or a philanthropy or a professional society. And the second is that very intentionally and not surprisingly, we've made these resources within the toolkit CC BY. And we want the community to not just adopt the resources, we want them to adapt the resources. We've already started to see this in play. We released this just a few months ago, but we already had a team of open source experts led by Johns Hopkins expanded the code and software primer that we developed to be more relevant to OSPO++ members. And OSPO++, I think folks know, is a network and a community of collaborative open source program offices across universities, governments, and civic institutions. We have a Zenodo page where we'll be capturing the variations and including those as well, so the toolkit can evolve over time. So I'm going to just briefly run through a few things here. I appreciate your indulging me. That we really have developed over the course of approximately 3 years in the Roundtable a theory of change, and that is that we need to develop these mutually reinforcing vectors, which is really just a fancy way of saying we want to create an environment in which researchers are hearing consistently from a range of influences that open practices are both warmly encouraged and properly rewarded. So in practice, what that means is that the guidance and the incentives that researchers receive from their department chairs and their university leadership and their funders and from their professional societies consistently points towards open. I think, from our perspective, I run the Open Research Funders Group, right? And so we do a lot of work within the philanthropic community to embed open principles within grant requirements, because that's the area that we're in the best position to influence. Through the Roundtable, we're certainly working with university leadership and university departments to consider how to embed open within hiring and review and tenure and promotion practices. Those are obviously the academy's points of leverage. Societies specifically play a unique and somewhat overarching role here. We know that if we're successfully to embed open within the fabric of funding or within tenure and promotion, we need to acknowledge that what constitutes best practices in anthropology is going to differ from what works in zoology. And so societies are really absolutely critical in helping to identify and articulate and socialize open norms within their specific discipline. So to get more granular about what that means in action, I want to provide three examples of what this can look like. So the first one is SIPS, which is the Society for the Improvement of Psychological Science. They collect examples of psychology job postings that explicitly contain open science criteria. And in doing so, what they've actually done is they've helped to create a de facto psychology standard that is now being applied with increased frequency across job postings within psychology. So they've sort of backed into a norm for language to include in job postings. Another example is the Academic Data Science Alliance, which probably many of you know. They've created an interest group for discussions about the intersection between data science and open science. They meet regularly and they explore practical issues like publishing open data, like what we just heard about, and getting proper credit for this type of work. And the group really is working to define best practices within what is itself an emerging discipline, academic discipline, data science. Another example I'll point to is the Linguistics Society of America. Working with the Roundtable, they drafted open science language that can be used by departments, linguistics departments, in hiring, in reviewing, in tenure and promotion. And they've also adapted a rubric that we created that can be used to evaluate the depth and the quality of the responses that researchers, that scholars put in to the questions that are being asked. And these are obviously just illustrative examples, but I do want to point out there are many ways in which societies can engage and think about open. And we certainly recognize that it would be beneficial if we as philanthropies and we as the national academies could engage and stimulate and catalyze these activities as much as is possible. And to that end, almost done, I'm pleased to share that the Roundtable, this is a bit of a sneak preview, the Roundtable is actually working with the AGU, with Shelley's colleagues at the AGU and with FASEB to develop a professional society community of practice. And the idea is, starting in 2022, we'll stand up a small cohort of professional societies that'll meet regularly to identify and articulate ways in which open research activities align with their organizational missions, and to develop guidelines and guidance for good open practice within the discipline. They'll test specific research incentives like prizes and awards that can be used to stimulate open within their discipline, and they'll explore opportunities for possible collaboration across societies and across disciplines. So things like infrastructure and things like training, and generally they'll work to amplify the voice of professional societies in the cross-stakeholder conversations that are happening about open research. The specifics of the work product for this cohort are ultimately going to be determined by the members, right? But there is something I do want to call out. It relates to the talk preceding me and the talk that will follow me, I assume. We recognize that, that many societies, or some societies, view open access as a really potentially existential consideration when it comes to the society business model. We get that. We expect that the ongoing work of this cohort will be informed by, but not defined by, this specific issue. The focus is really going to be on upstream practices and systems that enable and help create a more open research ecosystem. So the journal business models are important, but they're not going to be core to the group's remit. Otherwise, that becomes the focus and there's no oxygen for anything else. So ultimately, we intend to launch this in 2022. We will have a relatively small set of societies to start with, so we can start building some connections and then move out from there. And along with AGU and FASEB, we'll have more to say about this shortly. That's all I have. So Shelley, I think I'll turn it back to you. And I know Eurus has some good comments that I want to hear as well.
Yeah, Greg, I didn't realize we were ready to announce that coming up. So I'm so excited. You're
breaking news at RDA.
Wow. So somebody tweet that out, would you? That is so cool. I might be a little giddy. Great. So Eurus, I've been, full disclosure, I am on a steering committee with Eurus on a number of efforts that I hope he's going to describe for us. Eurus is the Director of Research Integrity at STM, and take it away, Eurus.
Thank you. And I assume everybody can see and hear me. If not, give me please wave from the camera. So thank you, Shelley. I want to talk today about a specific project which pertains to, I think, the general role that associations and societies can play in encouraging open data practices. So let me, as Shelley mentioned, I'm the Director for Research Integrity. So I manage several projects in the realm of integrity, open science, transparency. And one of the focuses for me is around research data and encouraging publishers to roll out tools that help authors to share, link, and cite research data alongside their publications. Let me start by saying a bit about STM. So STM is the International Association for Scientific, Technical and Medical Publishers. We have about 140 members, and we represent about 2/3 of all published content worldwide. Very important is that we work together. We collaborate with various actors in the scholarly ecosystem. We understand we have to collaborate and really to improve things. We do that by developing standards and technology. And really the goal is to ensure that our research is of high quality, trustworthy, and easy to access. Now, when you talk about research data, and that's going to be the focus for me today as well, you really think about infrastructure, you think about standards, recommendations, policy. And for that, of course, we have to work together, and organizations like the RDA and Force 11 have been proven very, very effective to create these. And publishers do play an important role in research data. There were several publishers at the forefront of some of the developments. For example, PLOS, they started to roll out data availability statements in their articles about 5 years ago. And once they made that mandatory, I know Angie talked about not making it mandatory, but when they made it mandatory, we saw enormous spike of uptake of availability statements. And the same with Biomed Central. When Elsevier, for example, wrote out Scholix 5 years ago, we also saw an enormous increase of the sharing of links to research data alongside publications. So publishers can play an important role, and we want to play that role. So inspired by that, first of all, by the development of all these great standards and infrastructure by organizations like the RDA, but also the good examples that those publishers gave in actually rolling these out and the impact it had, we decided, it's already 2 years ago, to create a research data year. And here you see a complex infographic. Well, I will run you through that in this presentation. And the goal was really, it's an action-based program to really support and help publishers to roll out the tools that help the authors to share the research data. The focus was on sharing, on linking and citing as the elements really of fair data. And again, to stress, it is an action-based program. It was not necessarily to develop new standards, but to take the standards that were developed in organizations like the RDA and to support publishers rolling these out, using the examples I used before, the very effective examples from the publishers I mentioned earlier. So this is just a summary of what we did in 2020, and then I will talk a bit about what the focus was this year and what it's going to be next year. So we started with a handful of publishers, but we managed to increase that to over 20. And actually, we had some publishers that joined this year. So with that, we have about 50% of all published content represented by our members of this program. And the idea is really, again, to help them to roll out 3 specific things that are elementary. First of all, the data policies. Not all journals have journal data policies. And with this initiative, we supported the publishers to roll this out. And for this, we used the policy framework that came out of the RDA interest group, used that as a recommendation and supported the publishers in basically selecting the right policies for their journals and rolling these out. The second focus was on availability statements. Very effective means, of course, to communicate whether data is available alongside publications, but also providing the link there. So it's also a way to create awareness among the researchers and the authors that research data should be shared and communicated that effectively to the reader community. So the third thing we focused on was on Scholix, of course, the framework allowing for the links between articles and data sets. And we aimed to have as many journals connected to Scholix as possible in that year. So how do we do that? Well, a lot is about providing information and educating publishers about what is available. We had several meetings and webinars. We started physical, but then of course COVID came and we moved online, but still it proved quite effective. So we had over 50 meetings, of course, with the publishers, where we had the more experienced publishers explain publishers that were new to FAIR data on how to roll out the policies, the availability statements, and connect as colleagues. But also here, again, collaboration is key. So we collaborate with various institutions, with funders as well, being so crucial in the effective rolling out of these tools and services. But also in the steering committee. So Shelley mentioned she's part of the steering committee. Hillary, RDA is also part. So again, we understand this is really a collaborative effort. So also in the steering committee, as well as in the meetings, we try to be as broad as possible and have the funders there, the institutions there, and of course the repositories there as well. Resources, so we have also a website, stmresearchdata.org, where you can find various resources and basically making it as easy as possible for the STM members, for the publishers, to select the right tools appropriate for their communities, to again support sharing, linking, and citing research data alongside publications. So some of it's very quickly about the results. So when we started the program, about 29% of the journals per publisher had a policy. We increased that to 50%. We doubled the availability of data statements in articles in that 1 year. And also we managed to connect many more journals as colleagues. So we were quite happy with the result, of course, but yeah, it's not 100%, and whether that's possible 100%, of course, is hard to say. But in any case, we believe, journals should have a policy, articles should have availability statements, and there should be an effective way to link two data sets from articles. So we decided, based on the one hand encouraging results, but also the fact that we're not there yet, to continue the year. So now we evolved not from a research data year into a research data program. And the focus for this year has been, first of all, again, to further roll out these policies, the availability statements, and these colleagues. But also we realized that we have to work on more alignments. One important topic that we realized we have to focus on is on the alignment of the policies between the funders and the publishers. And of course, that has a lot to do with the experience from the author. If you are an author and you're if you're a researcher, I should say, and you become an author and you share your research, you don't want to be confronted with the need to share your data at that point. You already have to prepare that at the start of the research, which is at the moment of funding. Hence, we want to make sure that the policies that we as publishers have are aligned with those of the funders. So we participate in the project from two RDA groups. We have actually a meeting after this. Well, actually we'll share analysis we did of sharing, of analyzing the data policies of the top 100 funders and compare these to the policies of publishers. And I will present that briefly in the session after this session. Sharing or suggesting the right repositories to authors is also an important element. So how do we make sure that when authors publish their research and they are asked to share their data as well, how can we make sure that we supply them with criteria which are accepted by the broader community, so the author can select the right repository? This is of course also something that is very much going on at RDA. So we are also actively involved here as well. And the last focus is around data quality. Now that we are increasingly sharing data, linking data, and citing data, the issue of quality comes up. How can we make sure that the data that is becoming so important, moving from a narrative-based science to a data science, how can we make sure that the quality criteria that we have developed for articles, how can we apply that to data as well, which pertains, of course, to the process of review and curation, but is also very much a shared responsibility between the institutes, the researchers, the publishers, and the repositories. So the moment we're developing a white paper to kind of sketch the landscape, using it as a discussion for the wider community to engage with. So this is a bit about our role. So again, the research data program is very much about execution, but at the same time, we see that a lot of the things that we come up to, we stumble upon, we have to do that in the wider community. And for us, the RDA, of course, is a great organization to do that. So we expect to continue to do that next year. So thank you. I'm looking forward to your questions.
Yours, thanks so much. It's really good to see so much coordination across the publishers. And, you know, there's a number of interesting comments in the chat, and I think maybe I'd like to share something that we have experienced at AGU, and I know that other publishers are as well. There's a really big difference between where our researchers are in reality and where we'd like them to be in the way that RDA has, you know, very progressively worked. There's quite a gap. So, you know, the work that's happening at ACS is amazing because we're taking those steps to get there. But, you know, publishers are in a very different place than a lot of the recommendations that are coming out at RDA. There's a lot of work to pull that forward. So you're seeing that in these steps that are being taken, but so exciting is that we are taking those steps. And I think that says a lot about culture change. So Angie, I want to just get your ears perked up. So some of the first questions that came in on the chat have a lot to do with what's happening at ACS. So I'm rolling back way up. Let's see. And so Angie, can you talk more about how you're actually capturing data and, you know, how you're thinking about DOIs and citation a little bit more at ACS? It's one option that journals have, and it actually makes it really easy on authors, and maybe you can talk to that a little bit.
Right, so I did look through all the chat, so I'll try to address all the points really briefly, but looking at we don't have a lot of time yet. But I'm gonna say right now, the current pilot that we have, there is no cost for an author to upload that data. It's in our submission system. That is not the ideal place to keep that data. And again, I don't know that would be great long-term. It is published then on Figshare. We did consider data availability statements. However, we didn't have a data policy. So when we had discussions with other publishers about starting data availability statements and really enforcing those, every publisher we talked to said you really need to have a data policy in place first. And that was just published just 2 months ago. So now we're looking at data availability statements and planning a pilot of trying to get that, because in an ideal world, I think every journal should, every publication should have a data availability statement, but we need to pilot, learn, and we are heading in that direction with data availability statements. And then as far as the DOI, I think this is just what we came up with as a pilot to start it. I don't say, again, it's not the best practice, but it was just a way to start, but we might look to DOIs or something, a different way forward.
Okay, that sounds good. And certainly, you know, you've got the entire RDA community to help support you on that journey. And we, Greg, I'm not sure how much you talked about the creation of the toolkit. It might be worth just highlighting, you know, the importance of getting that as a National Academy publication. And I know some of the comments in here are about like where and what and which appendix and where's the toolkit exactly. And if you could talk to that a little bit, that would be great.
For sure, and we really it was the elements within the toolkit are crowdsourced in the sense that we had working groups within the roundtable. I see Bob Hanisch from NIST is on the call, and Bob was one of the contributors among probably 3 or 4 dozen folks across the different working groups, and these were developed in consultation and with input from community stakeholders as well over a period of about 12 to 18 months. I will say we actually released a draft of the toolkit almost a year before the final version was posted on the National Academy site. Part of the delay was our insistence that this be a CC BY license associated with it. The National Academies was more than amenable, but it was sufficiently distinct from their typical course of operations that figuring out what that would mean took some time to navigate. One of the reasons we wanted to make it openly licensed was not just so that the community could adapt it, but I saw in the chat, gosh, it'd be great to make this more interactive, to break the bits down into, into individual resources, et cetera, and so forth. We absolutely have aspirations to do that. It's a lot easier to parse things out and build and fork and build off of them, obviously, when things are under a CC BY license.
Fantastic. Fantastic. And yours, I'm hopping over to you. So the dashboard, I know that we've had conversations within the folks that are populating that dashboard on how to make that more consumable. And I don't know if Dan's offering to code it for you or not, but I think the comment about building a website, I guess that's just the toolkit. But maybe we could talk about the dashboard as also having a good infographic as well. I may have taken one comment and laid it on top of yours slide.
I haven't seen the remark, but maybe to mention something about the dashboard. Yes, so in 2020 we wanted to be very transparent about the progress. So if you go to the STM Research Data Year website, and I can provide a link in the chat. We also have a dashboard there, basically displaying the progress in terms of uptake of availability statements. Also as a way, first of all, to be transparent about what we do and the progress we make, but also hoping to encourage other publishers to update and implement these tools as well.
Thank you. That's great. Claudia has a question about, and I'll admit that my ability to know copyright is not good, especially internationally, but I'm wondering if Angie can help navigate Claudia's question about the data that supports a figure. AGU requires sharing that, and she's getting pushback from someone that if figures caught. Angie, do you have the background to be able to answer that question?
Somewhat. I don't know if and so whatever I say, don't, it might not be 100%, but I would think that the data behind that figure should be available if the paper is published. That's my gut instinct. Yeah. But that doesn't mean that that's 100% correct. I'm not an expert in data embargoing data, but that was my interpretation.
Yeah, you and me both. I should think it would be open to, and maybe that's something that we can get some help from the working group at AG or at RDA for legal concerns, so we can answer that question a lot more faster. But I'm with you, Angie. So 2 unqualified people, Claudia, have just tried to answer that for you.
Yeah.
Thank you. Just to qualify, I'm preparing funder policies for data sharing, and I've been asked all kinds of questions against data sharing. Okay, and this is one of them that I don't know how to answer. Thank you.
Indeed, and maybe there's a way for us to help you. I know I've leaned on the legal folks at NIST to navigate some strange questions. Somebody's got a hand up. Let me hop over to that. Phil, you took your hand down.
Yeah. So on the question of copyrightable data, or whether data is copyrightable, it is true that raw data can't be copyrighted because it's considered fact. And that's the reason why raw data can't be copyrighted. But you only have to process it at all for that not to be true anymore. So there are instances of companies that will simply encode data and just move it from one place to another. That constitutes processing, therefore it's copyrightable. So it's technically true, but practically, when it comes to having created a graph and done some processing on some data and so, it's not true anymore.
All right, that might be something that we can help clarify. I feel like that's a little too generous on copyright. Meaning, I think the data should be open. I think Angie and I should we need to push for the data to be more open. That seems like somebody leaned in on legal too much. Yeah, that's probably too squishy, right? Let's see, Kirsten, do you want to ask your question?
Well, I would like to comment on what has been discussed just now, and I would like to support Phil's statement about the simple fact of collecting data does not provide copyright, but as soon as you somehow process your data, you gain intellectual property rights, and then you can use a license, for example, that is assigned to, like a CC-BY license, for example, which you can only use for when you have an intellectual property right. What I also know is that the largest change from CC-BY 3.0 to 4.0 was the inclusion and the expansion to data that is archived and managed in a database, because the simple fact to create this database is treated as intellectual property, and therefore data, even raw data that is managed in a database, can be assigned with CC-BY. This is what I know from my work.
I'll tell you what, we're a bunch of non-experts, so let's set this aside and maybe we can get some help from some experts. But yeah, I think all of these things are probably true, but I feel like we could probably use a legal resource to help navigate the actual answers.
Sure, but Shelley, I think if the journal requires the data to be open, it has to be open. Yeah. And if the journal does not require the data, or does not like to see the data open, or I think it's the journal can set the rule. And if they decide, okay, we would like to have all data underlying a figure to be open, then it's their statement, and they have to tell it to the research community, and then they can decide, yes, I'll make some exceptions for data that can be accessed upon request for certain reasons, and for everything. We do the very same with ESSD every day, that sometimes we have to agree on licenses that we would not like to have, but it's up to the journal to say. So I think everything goes back to the journal policies.
And thank you for pulling us back in. And I am seeing a couple comments in the chat supporting exactly what you're saying, that that culture change that we're working towards, that ability to share our data is really, we need to all pull together as stakeholders, where funders require certain openness and journals require certain openness. I think that would be incredibly helpful. There was something that Angie said earlier that I'd really like to hear from our community about, what this concept of badging. I've seen arguments on both sides that yes, it's a great incentive for researchers, but on the other hand, it doesn't actually do I've heard the other side of the argument, and I'm wondering, have Greg or Joris, have you explored concepts around badging, and are they effective?
I'll let Joris go first, and I can just probably chime in briefly.
And batching in the sense on article level or journal level?
Anything. Does anything actually result in more sharing, or result in, or more citations for a paper? Like, is there any value back to the researcher or the community based on badging?
Well, I think there are certainly advantages of sharing data, and there's some research that shows that the more data you share, the higher you get cited and you're reused. So I think absolutely. We also have to move the recognition, not just from the article, also from the data. I think that's responsibility for the community to make sure that the data itself becomes a valuable and measured research output instead of the article. I think that's a large responsibility, again, which is not just on the shoulders of the publishers, but of the entire community. In light of the 1 minute left, I'll leave the.
I think you captured, and I'm sensitive to the clock as well, so I'll turn it back to Shelley.
Well, and I also have to run a session that starts in probably 30 seconds. So I will thank our presenters. Thank you so much, Angie and Greg and Joris, and everyone's engagement. And clearly we need to continue working on broad culture changes and policies and all of the other things that are available to societies and associations to help make this a true reality that data and software are well documented and available to all, and as much as possible. So thank you so much. Bye, everybody.
Thank you.
Yeah.